The FBI arrested him this morning after he told senior employees yesterday that his business was a giant Ponzi scheme.
Imagine standing in a packed courtroom, reporters scribbling notes, cameras flashing, and everyone whispering about the biggest scam of our time. At the center of it all, a fast-talking genius who spun a web of lies so big, it ruined lives and drained billions of dollars. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just any con artist. They didn't just trick a few people. They fooled banks, investors, even their closest friends. With fake names, secret bank accounts, and a smooth smile, they played the system like a pro, leaving some of the smartest people scratching their heads. Now, as the judge gets ready to deliver the verdict, the world holds its breath. Will justice finally catch up? What makes someone pull off scams this bold? And more importantly, can anyone truly escape the long arm of the law? In the world of courtroom drama, few stories grip the public quite like that of Elizabeth Holmes.
Well, jurors in the criminal fraud trial of Elizabeth Holmes just reached their verdict.
A key day for the prosecution in the Elizabeth Holmes criminal fraud trial.
California concerns the Elizabeth Holmes trial.
Once hailed as the female Steve Jobs, Holmes was the golden child of Silicon Valley. She wore a signature black turtleneck, spoke in a calculated baritone, and promised to revolutionize healthcare with a device that sounded too good to be true. And it was.
Theranos means being able to see the onset of disease in time to be able to do something about it.
Her company, Theranos, claimed it could run hundreds of blood tests using just a single drop of blood, a dream that would change medicine forever. Investors flocked to her vision, driving Theranos to a jaw-dropping valuation of $4.5 billion. But when the curtain was pulled back, it revealed one of the biggest frauds in history. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, former employees, and investors all sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on Holmes as she took the stand. The stakes couldn't be higher. On one side, a young woman who had convinced some of the world's most powerful people, think Rupert Murdoch and Henry Kissinger, to invest millions. On the other hand, prosecutors meticulously lay out a case of deception, manipulation, and outright lies.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Holmes, with her piercing blue eyes and carefully rehearsed demeanor, painted herself as a victim of circumstance. She blamed the failure of Theranos on unforeseen technical challenges, and even pointed her fingers at her former business partner, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, claiming he controlled and manipulated her. It was a defense designed to elicit sympathy, but the prosecution was relentless. Former employees testified about the pressure to produce results, even when the technology simply didn't work. They described a toxic work environment where questions were silenced and failures were hidden. One chilling moment in the trial came when a lab director detailed how inaccurate test results had potentially endangered patients' lives. Imagine being told you were cancer-free, only to later discover the diagnosis was wrong. Or worse, being misdiagnosed with a serious illness or undergoing unnecessary treatment. The courtroom buzzed with outrage. But perhaps the most dramatic moments came when the prosecution presented damning evidence, emails, internal reports, and testimonies that showed Holmes knew her device couldn't deliver on its promises. One by one, the house of cards she'd built began to collapse.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty of conspiracy to defraud Theranos investors, not guilty of conspiracy to defraud Theranos patients.
The jury listened intently as prosecutors painted a picture of a woman who, despite her charisma and vision, prioritized ambition over truth. Throughout the trial, Holmes remained composed, her eyes occasionally welling with tears as she recounted her version of events. But even her tearful moments were met with skepticism. Was it genuine remorse or another calculated move from a master manipulator? The courtroom was a stage, and Holmes was performing for her life. When the verdict finally came, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, the weight of her deception was laid bare. Elizabeth Holmes had not only betrayed the trust of her investors, but also had risked the health and safety of countless patients.
But again, Elizabeth Holmes in a mixed verdict, but convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and convicted of wire fraud substantively against Theranos investors.
Her fall from grace was as spectacular as her rise, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition overrides ethics. The world watched as she left the courthouse, no longer a visionary, but a convicted fraudster, destined for prison. When Bernie Madoff walked into a Manhattan courtroom in 2009, The air was electric with anticipation. This wasn't just any trial.
Tonight, as much as $50 billion is gone, vanished.
It was the reckoning of a man who had orchestrated the largest Ponzi scheme in history.
The FBI arrested him this morning after he told senior employees yesterday that his business was a giant Ponzi scheme,
swindling $65 billion from thousands of investors over decades.
We lost 95% of what we had.
I think what he did is despicable.
He sold his soul for the buck.
I kept saying, this can't be. This just is not happening.
Madoff had been a Wall Street titan, a trusted figure who promised consistent.
Of these new types of systems is to make it easier and more cost-effective for people to trade.
Almost magical returns, but behind the facade of legitimacy lay a labyrinth of lies. And now, the world was about to see the true face of financial betrayal. The courtroom was packed with victims, journalists, and onlookers eager to witness justice. Some of Madoff's victims had lost everything: retirement savings, college funds, even their homes. Many sat with clenched fists and tear-streaked faces, their lives shattered by the man who once assured them they were in safe hands. The weight of their collective pain hung heavy in the room. Madoff, wearing a simple suit, appeared eerily calm as he faced the judge. His demeanor was cold, almost detached, as if he were merely a spectator to his own downfall. But the drama began when the victims were allowed to speak. One by one, they approached the stand, their voices trembling with a mix of anger and despair. "You've destroyed my family," one woman sobbed, clutching a photograph of her late husband. Another man, his voice cracking, shouted, "I hope you rot in jail for the rest of your life." The courtroom was riveted, and even the most stoic observers couldn't help but feel the raw emotion. Madoff sat impressively through these testimonies, offering no apology, no sign of remorse. It was a chilling display of detachment that only fueled the outrage in the room. How could a man who had ruined so many lives remain so unmoved? The prosecution meticulously laid out the details of Madoff's scam.
Of Wall Street, which sometimes the regulators lose sight of, and as do the academics, it's a for-profit enterprise.
They described how he had created fake account statements to convince investors their money was growing, all while siphoning funds to pay off earlier clients and finance his lavish lifestyle. The scale of the deception was staggering. Madoff had fooled not only individual investors, but also major institutions, charities, and even celebrities. He'd become a master of illusion, using his charm and reputation to keep the scheme afloat for decades.
Brother and myself, that there was an opportunity to bring automation into the over-the-counter marketplace.
When it was Madoff's turn to speak, the courtroom held its breath. He admitted to everything, but his confession was devoid of emotion. "I am deeply sorry," he said, though the words felt hollow. It was too little, too late. The judge, clearly unimpressed, handed down the maximum sentence: 150 years in prison. Gasps echoed through the room. For the victims, it was a bittersweet moment, a symbolic victory, but one that couldn't undo the devastation. As Madoff was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom buzzed with a mix of relief and lingering anger. The man who had once been the king of Wall Street was now just another convict, destined to spend his remaining days behind bars. But for his victims, the scars would last a lifetime, a painful reminder of the trust they had placed in the ultimate conman. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Anna Sorokin, better known by her alias Anna Delvey, walked in. Dressed in designer outfits, complete with a pair of oversized glasses perched on her nose, she looked every bit the glamorous socialite she had pretended to be. But there was no luxury awaiting her this time, only the cold, hard gavel of justice. Anna had conned her way into New York's elite, posing as a wealthy German heiress and swindling banks, hotels, and even her closest friends out of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Now, a German con artist who passed herself off as a wealthy heiress to swindle banks, hotels, and even close friends as she lived out a high society.
Now her double life was unraveling in dramatic fashion. As the trial began, the prosecution wasted no time painting Sorokin as a master manipulator. They laid out how she had charmed her way into Manhattan's high society, using fake financial documents and elaborate lies to fund her extravagant lifestyle. Luxury hotels, private jets, and Michelin-starred dinners. Anna lived the kind of life most could only dream of, and she did it all on other people's dime.
Now to Anna Delvey, the convicted con artist who's portrayed in the popular Netflix show Inventing Anna. She has lost her battle to stay in the U.S. after completing her prison sentence.
Her victims ranged from corporate giants to unsuspecting friends who had trusted her implicitly. The courtroom was filled with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. On one side sat the victims, many of whom were still reeling from the betrayal. One friend, Rachel Williams, took the stand and described how Anna had duped her into covering a $62,000 bill for a lavish vacation in Morocco. She promised she'd wire me the money, Rachel said, her voice breaking. It never came. The tension in the room was palpable as Rachel recounted the moment she realized Anna was a fraud. Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Anna's defense team, however, portrayed her as a misunderstood dreamer. They argued that she had never truly intended to defraud anyone, and that her actions were simply the result of trying to fit into a world that demanded perfection and wealth. Anna herself sat calmly, occasionally smirking, as if she found the whole thing mildly entertaining. Her nonchalance only added to the courtroom drama. The prosecution brought out the big guns, presenting evidence that included forged bank statements and emails, where Anna spun elaborate tales about her fictitious fortune. They even played clips of her interrogation.
She was upset about the clothing that she had received from the Department of Corrections.
I've had numerous conversations with Ms. Sorokin about the mistakes that she made and what led her to those mistakes. I've had conversations with her about her future.
Where Anna's arrogance was on full display. "Do you think I'm basic?" she quipped to one officer, eliciting gasps and head shakes from the courtroom. When it came time for Anna to testify, everyone leaned in. She spoke in a clipped, confident tone, dismissing the charges as misunderstandings. "I never asked anyone to pay for me," she insisted, as murmurs rippled through the gallery. But her performance fell flat. The jury saw through her act, and after days of deliberation, they found her guilty on multiple counts of theft and fraud. As the judge delivered her sentence, 4 to 12 years in prison, Anna remained stoic. Her empire of lies had crumbled, but she seemed unbothered. The courtroom emptied.
She was just a young woman following her dream, naive maybe. Therefore, defendants serving, all told, a minimum of 4 years incarceration, a maximum of 12 years incarceration.
Leaving behind a lingering question: was Anna Sorokin a criminal, a genius, or simply a product of a society obsessed with wealth and status? One thing was certain: her story was far from over. The courtroom was tense as Sam Bankman-Fried, the once celebrated crypto genius, faced the fallout from the collapse of his empire.
FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He was found guilty back in November of orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar fraud that led to the collapse of his company.
Just a year ago, he had been seen as a financial prodigy, a guy who could revolutionize how we use money through his cryptocurrency exchange FTX. But now, sitting in a wrinkled suit with his signature messy hair, he looked nothing like the confident leader investors once trusted with billions.
It's really, really sad. Really sad. Not only how it's affected me, but how it's affected millions of people globally.
The prosecutors didn't hold back. They laid out how FTX wasn't what it seemed. Instead of keeping customers' money safe, Bankman-Fried had used it for risky investments, luxury purchases, and to prop up his other failing ventures. As the evidence piled up, emails, financial reports, and even his own tweets, gasps rippled through the courtroom. The people who had lost their life savings sat quietly, their faces showing a mix of anger and heartbreak. The most emotional moments came when former employees took the stand. They described how Bankman-Fried had fooled everyone, pretending everything was fine while knowing the company was crumbling. "He told us we were changing the world," one witness said, their voice shaking, but he knew it was all fake. Bankman-Fried tried to defend himself, saying he never meant for things to go so wrong, but his words felt hollow. He sometimes smiled nervously or gave vague answers, which only made things worse. The jury wasn't buying it. When the verdict was announced, guilty on all charges, the room was silent except for a few quiet sobs. Bankman-Fried's empire had fallen, and so had his reputation. As he was led out in handcuffs, the weight of his actions were clear. He had gambled with people's fortunes, and now he was paying the price. And that wraps up the wild stories of some of the biggest scammers to ever set foot in a courtroom. From fraudulent tech to fake heiresses and collapsed empires, these cases remind us of one thing: not everything that glitters is gold. But what do you think? Which of these courtroom dramas shocked you the most? Have any other infamous fraudsters in mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most jaw-dropping scandals. See you in the next one.